Welcome, everyone, to another fantastic episode of the Cucina Aurora Kitchen Witchery podcast, another episode of Conversational Witchcraft with me, Dawn the Kitchen Witch, and I am super excited to introduce you all to my new BFF. This is the amazing, bright, sunshiny, bubbly, fantastic, super, super unique. Really can't wait to get to know her better. Sarah Mastros. She is an author of Orphic Hymns Grimoire and the Big Book of Magical Incense. She is a Pittsburgh's leading witch for hire. In addition, she teaches tarot, witchcraft, some Solomonic, I'm sure I pronounced that incorrect, Solomonic magic, Solomonic. Greek and Near Eastern mythology, Pan-Leviathan folk magic, which I've never even heard of, so that sounds amazing, and practical sorcery online and at festivals all over the East Coast. Sarah, I am so excited to have you here.
I wanna say something. Pan-Leviathan sorcery would be amazing.
What did I say? What did I say? Totally
you said Pan-Leviathan, which would be amazing, and like I would definitely be down for that. But
how do you pronounce
Levantine? Levantine just means like Near Eastern.
Sorry, I got really excited.
Levantine means like the whole Eastern Mediterranean.
I got super excited.
Yeah, no, I got excited too. You made me sound so much cooler than I actually am.
You're super cool. Let's create Pan-Leviathan witchcraft. Let's just do that. That's a very big
like the god Pan and Leviathan. And it Leviathan. Would be amazing. I'm so into that.
Let's make that happen right now. That'll be a new oracle deck, the Pan-Leviathan oracle deck. I love it. You are such a ray of sunshine. Seriously, I know that you are in your ritual attire. You said before we started recording that you wear this ritual attire whenever you are working. I have never seen a modern witch in this type of garb. Can you tell those of us who are watching what you're wearing? And can you also, for people who aren't listening, who aren't watching but are just listening, can you describe your garb?
Yes, I forgot that people were looking at me.
Yes, some will and some aren't.
Right. So I'm wearing what I call crocopeplos, and I'll talk about that word in a second, but I'm just wearing like a bright saffron yellow dress and then like a yellow headscarf with a red band, similar to like the sort of band that a nun would have on a headscarf. Mm-hmm. Right.
I guess way more colorful than a nun.
Yeah, it's bright saffron yellow. Yeah, right.
Gorgeous.
So thank you. I like, actually, weirdly, I'm not that huge a fan of this super bright yellow color. I don't think I look great in it. That's actually why I had to negotiate with the spirits to get this red band, because the yellow made me look it's not actually a great color on my skin. So crocopeplos, right, is a Greek word. It literally just means croco, like a crocus flower, like saffron. It just means saffron, the color, but also the food spice.
The spice, right?
Which is the plant material.
Right, because saffron is actually the
stamen of a crocus flower.
I was going to be more graphic and I was going to say the reproductive organs.
Right.
It's the little flower. Right.
It's the little like piece that comes up and is all covered in like that bright orangey yellow pollen.
Yes.
And saffron, and that's, so to Greeks, that's what they call the color yellow. Just like we call the color orange and like the fruit orange.
Yes.
The color yellow, they just call it saffron in this context. Yes. So croco, and then peplos just means a dress. So like if you imagine like the kind of like short dress that like Artemis wears, that's a peplos. But really it's just like a kind of a girl toga is an easy way to think about it. But historically it's not a toga, but like it's basically that, right? But it just means dress in this context. So
what is the context of this and why do you choose to wear it?
Crocopeplos is also like a name, an epithet for a wide variety of goddesses, right? And so sometimes it's literally translated, as saffron cloaked, but it also has like this metaphoric meaning, right? So it's applied primarily to like celestial goddesses and most often to lunar goddesses, right? And so for me, what the crocopeplos means, right, is, you know how the moon, when it's like obscured by clouds, like it lights that whole portion of the sky lights up, right? Unlike when the sun is obscured, right, it makes a shadow. Right. But by night, when you're looking at like complicated nighttime witchy things, right, a little bit of veiling, a little bit of clouds actually extend your ability to see it, right? So it's about, before I quit my day job and dropped out of the real world to be a professional witch, which I would have done the whole time, had I been aware, I feel like my guidance counselor told me this was not a viable option.
They never tell you that.
I would have been doing this the whole time if I didn't think I had to have a real job. But when I had to have a real job, first I was a research mathematician, and then I taught high school math for a while. Yeah,
it's crazy to me.
And so, you know, we have this sort of technical jargon in teaching where we talk about like the liminal zone of acquisition. And that's like a really complicated way to explain. Like just there's, you know, some things are too easy and they're boring. And some things are too hard and they're frustrating. But there's like a magical zone in the middle, which is the fun kind of learning where you're learning things that are like the right amount of hard. Right. And so I think that's true when we talk about like learning math in high school, but it's also true in this more like sort of spiritual growth and illumination, right? So the goddess of the Crocopeplas, I think of as that sort of magical liminal space, right? The goddess of like liminality and learning and liberation, because I think that's what learning does, right? It liberates us from ignorance, right? And so to me, that's like what the goddess of the Crocopeplas is all about. And so when I am doing her work in the world, I wear her garb, which is like, oh gosh, I suddenly said it that way and it made it seem like I'm like dressing up as her, and that is not my goal at all. It's like a nun. I'm not like dressing up, like I'm dressing up as a nun, not dressing up as a goddess. It's devotional, right? Like, but it's also, so here's the thing, like the nature of my work and the nature of our culture, but particularly like my job more than other jobs I've had, the line between me and like the public me and the parts of me that are like not for sale, those are the inside me. There's also an element to that about it, right? Like it's something that I wear in an outward facing way, right? In a modest way. And it like a tinfoil hat to protect me from all your weird psychic being.
Always said we were the same kind. We're the same kind of weird, Sarah.
Oh no, everybody.
No, just the general you. All the icky, all the icky weird.
No, it's not even just ickiness. It's just about like.
Yeah, for sure. It's about like, shielding.
It's about
shielding,
but it's also about like remembering to be on my best behavior.
Yes.
Because when you're wearing a nun habit, you do have to like live up to that shit. Like I have to be good. I'm in you know what I mean? I'm in a public facing. There's like a responsible way I have to act that. Maybe I don't act in my living room at 2 o'clock in the morning because I'm a person.
100%. Right.
Yeah. Like, and so I think of it in both those ways. It helps me like hold that boundary between like when I'm working in service of the divine powers of liberation and when I'm just like being a person who's allowed to just be a fuck up.
Yeah, well, no, but that's ritual attire, because when you are working, you know, it can be as grand as you're wearing this full regalia that is in honor and in devotion to your goddesses and your gods and your work. But for me, it's an apron, right? Like I'm putting that on when I begin my work, and it reminds me what I'm doing is spiritual work. So if I'm teaching a class publicly, you bet your ass I'm going to have an apron on, because it reminds me, right, this is the work that I have to do, you know, and even like if I take that out into the Muggle world, if I'm wearing my company logo, you bet your ass I'm not cutting someone off in the parking lot. Or even if I'm going to the grocery store or whatever, like I've got a big van with my company name on it. Right. So if I run a stop sign, everybody's going to know it's me. Like it's still reminding you that you're in a space where you can't just be a fuck up. You have to be in the right headspace. And I think that all plays to your magic.
That's another thing that I really thought a lot about when I was teaching, right? Because also, particularly when you're teaching kids, like now, God. I mean, how bad am I going to fuck up the audience if I fuck up? Like they're all adults. They don't like, I don't actually have any power over them. Like when you're teaching proper school, you like really do. You're like an exemplar, like you got to be on your grown-up behavior.
Yeah. 100%.
And it's an element of that as well. Like it helps me distinguish. Also, it keeps me from just teaching at people in my regular life, which they don't know.
Because you're like, if I don't have this on, I can't just immediately start talking about all the shit that I know.
I totally just now realized is something my mom used to teach elementary school. I realized now that she did it all the time. She would like teacher voice at us. And we were not she taught 8-year-olds and we'd be full ass adults. And she would just slip it in. We're like, no, mom, no.
Don't teach your voice.
I do that too. Yeah, but I do it too. I just don't teach little kids, so I think it's maybe slightly less obvious when I try to teach.
So I'm so interested, and thank you for sharing all of that about
Sure.
about your devotational and ritual attire, because it's really unique and I haven't seen it before, and I would guess that a lot of other people haven't seen it before. And I love that you take your craft to this devotional level and have that separation. I think that's a really powerful, magical tool. I want to back up a little bit and I want to learn about your journey. Okay. You have a master's of theoretical mathematics. First of all, mathematics, what the fuck? Second of all, theoretical, like that's
the best kind. I just think about stuff.
You think about, okay. So, in full disclosure, I have like, whatever, I don't even know what it's called. It's dyslexia with math. Mm-hmm. It's like mathlexia. It's like called something like that. So math is dyscalculia. Thank you. It's the bane of my existence. I've failed every math class in my entire life. So I'm absolutely befuddled by anyone who like chose math. Like, why would you choose torture?
Here's some stuff.
And I can see people being into that.
Which I will say, like, no, real talk. One way to think about it is like, I got the whole way up to the place where I was going to spend the rest of my life doing math, like 16 hours a day. And that's when I figured out, like, oh, wait,
this is
what am I doing? What am I doing? Look, I think that almost everybody, what they hate about math is that it's taught like garbage.
Truth.
Like, I really think like this is gonna sound like I'm making a joke because I'm a pretty, jolly person, but I really mean it in all seriousness. Like, the way we teach mathematics in the United States is legitimately traumatizing. And I would
attest to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I really mean it. Like, I feel like as a teacher, I spent a significant amount of time with students just treating their math PTSD before I could do anything else. And I taught primarily good, like students who were good in math in rich white kids schools. So I was teaching like the kids who were like, by and large, the least traumatized by it. And still, even most of them, almost everyone in the United States who like gets through middle school not hating math, it's because they had already learned math at home.
Wow.
Like their uncle is a engineer, or like their mom's a computer scientist. Like somebody just taught them math
right
before they got to school. And that was the same deal with me. Like my dad, like I was just learning math at home as like a cool, fun puzzle. So by the time I got to school and saw them torture people with it, I was like, oh, that's not really math.
I love that. I love that story.
I know that sounds like,
no,
I really could not speak more strongly. I worry that what I'm about to say makes me sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist.
No. It's everything. Everything is good here.
Okay, the way we teach mathematics in the United States is totally different than the way it's taught basically anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
If I were trying to develop a way to teach math that would make people gullible and unable to reason for themselves, I feel like the things that we do to math in America are exactly what I would do to produce that result. And I don't think most math teachers know that, because it requires a certain kind of devious thinker to be like, oh, if I was trying to fuck people up, here's what I would do. Like, I feel like most people don't actually think those thoughts.
So a
lot of like, it's not like I think math people, like, I don't know any math teachers. And, I taught math for a long time. I know a lot of math teachers. I don't know any of them who think that, like, the way we do it in the US is good.
Right.
Like, everybody who is participating in this system knows it's terrible.
But that's how we have to do it. And that's what the curriculum is. And that's, we've got standardized testing. And this is how you have to teach it so the kids can answer the questions.
I didn't have kids. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't have dependents when I was a teacher. And I was maybe a little less afraid of poverty than some of my colleagues who had no experience with it. Like, if I got fired, I was not gonna jump off a cliff. Like,
right.
Whatever. I could make it work. I've made terrible things work many times in the past.
Right.
And so I feel like, honestly, there was a fear of getting fired.
Sure.
That I just didn't have. Like, I did also, I'm pretty good. I was pretty good at my job. So, and there's like a desperate national shortage of math teachers.
Yes.
And it seemed like other math teachers didn't realize that. But they couldn't fire me because I was irreplaceable.
I could see that.
Genuinely irreplaceable. Like, I've tried, like, later on in my career, I was the one trying to hire a math teacher, like, in November, and you just can't do it. Like, yeah. I legitimately, I just ended up teaching twice as many classes because I couldn't, and like kids had a like basically kids alternated. They had a teacher one day and a computer program the other day because I was juggling all of them. Like, I was teaching 2 classes at once because I literally couldn't replace
I believe
him.
it.
I'm glad I got rid of, but I knew that. So I really leaned into that. Well, what are you going to do? Fire me. Like, when they told me to do stuff I didn't want to do, I just didn't do it.
I'm so curious about how.
But it's like, my ability to do that was rooted in privilege. Like, I didn't actually desperately need that job.
And some of us have been very lucky in that respect. Yeah. And it's great that you were, but I'm really, really interested in.
Yeah, sorry.
No. This is awesome. Are you kidding me? I'm loving learning about you. Okay. I'm very interested in how you grow up in this sort of like being really interested in math. And so if you're really interested in math, to me, that says you have a really great problem solving brain. You have a really great technical brain where you like to figure things out and all that sort of thing, and very scientific and fact-based. And, in my experience, people that are good at those things are really into researching and really good into fact collecting and that sort of thing. Not so much into magic and
I like to know how things worked.
Right. So
also sometimes trees and ghosts talked to me.
So yeah, tell me about how you're this kid who loves math, but then trees and ghosts are talking to you. And then how do you get from one thing to the next?
Here's the thing. Like, when you're really young, I thought trees and ghosts were talking not to everybody.
To everybody,
but when I told that to other 7-year-olds, they didn't deny it. And some of them also that had happened.
Sure.
Right? But then I feel like other people got older and they grew out of it, and I maybe just didn't. But I also wondered if maybe other people weren't growing out of it. They had just learned to keep their mouth shut about it. Because it wasn't like nobody. There were definitely people who believed in ghosts.
Yeah.
So I just maybe kept that to myself.
So were you raised in an environment where that sort of thinking was celebrated, or was it poo-pooed? No. Oh, she has such an imagination, because you, if I'm not mistaken, grew up in a very Greek household. Is that correct?
Well, so it's complicated. So my dad's Greek.
Okay.
Right. And my mom's Jewish. And I grew up in a household that was very culturally Greek.
Right.
But maybe with the black sheep of that family, the one that was a little too weird for them. And then I grew up in my mom's family, which is very Jewish, not in a Orthodox religious sense, but culturally,
yes,
quite Jewish,
yes.
Right? Quite Ashkenaz matriarchy, right? There's no men on that side of the family.
Right.
It's just my mom and her sisters and her mom and her dad's mom, but not her dad, right. It's just all women.
It's all women.
Right. And that was interesting. That was interesting. But,
right.
Both of my parents were the sort of people who signed up to do that. Right. So my parents didn't. Here's what I will say. I don't think my parents ever fully understood me, but they accepted me, right? They were people who were okay with things that were different, right?
Because they both felt kind of different in their own respects.
Yeah, each of them definitely was, in some sense, I don't want to say the outcast in their family. My parents weren't estranged from their family.
No.
But maybe my parents, my mom was maybe the weird one of her 3 sisters. Well, and my dad was definitely the weird one out of his
siblings. I mean, I grew up in a very, 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 very traditional Italian Catholic, New York Italian Catholic family. Right. So for me, even just the way I grew up, and this is going to sound so awful. And I don't anybody read anything into this, but like when I grew up, it was like, you had to marry an Italian Catholic. Like you had to marry an Italian Catholic.
Right.
So I think everybody's like that and everybody's parents are like that. And I'm thinking,
see,
oh my God,
I
this
think
Jewish girl married a Greek guy. Both of those
Yeah.
families must have freaked the hell out because the Jewish girl married the Greek guy.
The way I understand it is, it was not an entirely approved of decision on either side. But by the time but my parents were in fact really well matched and happy.
Yes,
and nobody else on like either side of their family was. Like my mom's sisters, their husbands were all terrible.
Exactly.
Like, and on my dad's side, some good, some bad, but like not maybe the best. But my parents did in fact have like a really good.
They had the best out of everything. They had the best marriage, right?
Right. And they had, well, I mean, there were, problems like anybody,
there's always,
including I was saying the earliest, they had a lot of trouble conceiving, right? So my parents had been married for like 8 years by the time I came along. And so more important, like to this conversation, like their families had just gotten over, like by the time I was on the scene,
they were like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Like, my parents were likable and clearly they got over it. Right. And I don't know, my parents' stories and my aunts and uncles' stories of how much animosity there was about the situation do not entirely align. I guess I'll say, so I don't know how disapproving people were. I think they all got over it pretty quick.
Point being that both of your parents have an experience in their life where maybe they didn't feel or they did feel like they were kind of the weird one out, or they're like, well, I'm walking my own path. And so that kind of translates into, we have this unique child who is also walking her own path, and we get that, which I think is really cool and supportive.
My dad definitely thought it was like weird that I was into all this superstitious nonsense.
Tell me about that. What superstitious nonsense?
Like talking to dead people.
Yeah.
But I will also say, I am like not the only person in my dad's family who talks to dead people. Like it runs in the family.
Of course it does. Of course it does.
Yeah, right. Of course.
Right. Of course.
So like on both sides of the family, but actually the dead people definitely. And I said, which like I didn't know until I was an adult, because my dad thought all that was superstitious nonsense. And they were all, and he like, but some of them are also like pretty fundamentalist Christian. And my dad also thought that was superstitious nonsense, which I agree. That's great. So it was like really, it took a long time for me to sort out like which bits of superstitious nonsense were terrible and which ones weren't.
Right.
But yeah, so like, but I mean, he wasn't a jerk about it. Like he thought it was a phase that I would grow out of.
And you're like, nope, now I'm a professional witch. Right. Like-
yeah. And well, I mean, my parents have been dead for a while, but I mean, I don't know. He didn't understand it, but he did not disapprove of it.
Right.
He just thought it was like a weird hobby to have turned into, and he definitely would be astonished that this is a real job.
It is a real job.
It
turns out that you can make a life being who you are and helping people and teaching people and enlightening people and inspiring people just by being who you are and sharing what you believe in. Like, that's fucking crazy, right?
When I think about it, like if I think through like my friends from high school, almost all of us are now doing like the thing we were told was not an option. My BFF in high school is now a professor of botanical medicine.
Wow, what a cool job.
Another friend of mine like develops video games at Facebook.
Amazing.
One of my friends, I've actually fallen out of touch with her. I don't know. But last I heard was the punk rock archivist at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Wow.
One of my, like it turns out all the things that we were told, like, were not jobs.
Right.
Those are actually the only employed people I know. Like, you know what jobs don't exist? The ones my guidance counselor was like pushing us all into. The like math professor? That's not even a job anymore.
Well, the world is changing. The world is different. And people are looking to not just get a paycheck, but also be fulfilled. And I think that's really important. And I think, like you said, you used to be a math teacher and now you're a professional witch. So I used to be an interior
I
designer.
love being a math teacher. I will say, like, the actual teaching part, like teaching, I loved that job. It just turned out that there was a lot of other garbage you had to do that wasn't teaching.
So were you always practicing witchcraft as you were being a teacher, as you were going through all these other?
Oh yeah, by the time I was an adult, definitely. Like
when did you find the path, and specifically your path? Because your path is really unique and bringing in so much of the Mediterranean stuff and what you practice. It's not the typical what we see in terms of like Celtic influenced or Gardnerian or something like that. Like the more popular types of
okay, well,
if you want to call it mainstream witchcraft. What you do is, I've only met one other person who really leans into the Greek mythology. And he,
which I think is weird because like there are Disney movies about the mythology. Like that's the first mythology almost everybody, like except for the Christian mythology.
Right. And but then, it predates a Christian mythology.
Yeah, so, no, but I mean, like that's the mythology that you like learn, like everybody knows. I feel like it's unusual that people skip that one. But
yeah, and we might celebrate the gods. Like I have Hecate sitting on my, she's sitting on my altar, mother of witches, but I wouldn't say that I, worship the Greek gods. I have her.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also Greek.
Right. Exactly. Like, so, but I'm Italian and I don't worship any Italian gods.
Honestly, like here's how it worked for me.
Like, I mean, except meatballs. Do meatballs count as things to worship?
I certainly, I put mint in my meatballs because I'm Greek.
Because you're Greek.
We'll have like a meatball cook-off later. It'll be a whole thing. Yeah, I'm into that. I will say secretly, I'm worried that somebody in internet land is going to be offended by what I'm about to say. But I don't think anybody who is entitled to be offended will be. I secretly believe that Greek, Jewish, and Italian are all basically the same thing. Like,
we're the same thing.
That's actually what Levantine means. Like those
Leviathan.
Yeah, right. Like the Levant is just a really old-fashioned word for like the entire Eastern Mediterranean. So like Italy, Greece, like Egypt, Carthage, Israel, like that whole sort of region. And like historically, that was one region.
Absolutely.
And partly my interest in that grew out of like reconciling these two different cultures that I grew up with that were in some ways very different, but there was a lot of overlap.
There's so much overlap. I mean, listen, again, like I said, I'm from New York, and in certain boroughs, I grew up out on Long Island, but in certain boroughs, you're in Philly, right? So it's kind of like the same thing. You have one block that's all Italian and one block that's all Jewish. Like and they have this was the joke that and again, I apologize if I offend anybody, but like, what's the difference between, Italians and Jewish people? Like Italians talk like this with their hands and Jewish people talk like this with their hands. And there's a difference, right? It's the difference between like, I can't even describe this for those that are listening, but it's like, this motion versus circles. That's it. And all of us, whether you're Greek, Italian, or Jewish, if you sit on your hands, you can't talk.
It's true.
But you have to gesture with every part of your hand and your arm. Otherwise you have to be quiet. Like that's just what it is.
And so relatively early in my like witchcraft. All right, let me back up a little.
Back up. Take us way
back. I personally feel like all toddlers are engaged in witchcraft. I feel like that sort of animistic witchcraft is just like the natural human way of associating with the world, and that our culture just pushes people out of it. Yeah. And I failed to successfully graduate from like my toddler level witchcraft. I love it. Still doing that.
Yes.
But I definitely remember the exact day that I found out that what I was doing was witchcraft.
Tell me.
Like, okay, so my mostly estranged grandfather sent me a birthday present, but it wasn't my birthday. He was just wrong about when my birthday was.
On your dad's side? Because
on my mother's side.
On your mother's side.
Yeah, so like my mom's parents got divorced when she was quite young. Okay. So like I had a grandfather, but he was not like meaningfully present in my life. She was only barely present in her life.
Okay, cool.
Right. Go on. So like, for example, he sent me a birthday present, but was totally wrong about when my birthday was. So I just randomly got this present in the mail, which was some book, but it also came with like a gift certificate to a mail order book catalog. So now I want to remind like the youngsters in the audience,
the babies,
that when I grew up,
There was no Amazon.
There was no internet. You couldn't just like get information. And I grew up in Amish country.
Oh,
like
dear
we weren't
Lord.
Amish, but I grew up in the country. Like, so my public library didn't have books that Christians didn't approve of.
Oh my goodness.
But I'm also only 8. So like, it's not, I mean, I actually have access as an 8-year-old. I have actually like access to much better books than other people do because my parents are both nerds. Right. So we've got like myths, and my dad's a sci-fi nerd. Like, we have books at home, but I don't have like, I'm also like maybe 8. I never know how old I am in this. I'm somewhere between like 8 and 12. I don't know how old I was when this happened.
Okay. Like, so you get this gift certificate to a mail order book
catalog.
And
it came with a mail order book catalog. And under the nonfiction section, there was this section called witchcraft.
Ooh.
And I knew what nonfiction meant. That meant that it was real.
It was real. It was real.
It was real. And I was like, Mom, are witches real? Like in fairy tales, are witches real? Yeah. And I showed her the book catalog. And she very politely said, there are definitely people who think they're witches. Which, good job, Mom. I feel like that's the good answer for an 8-year-old. Like, what was she going to say? And I was like, can I get a book of witchcraft? She's like, you can, but it's not going to be interesting. Like, it's not what you think it's going to be. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get one. But she didn't like forbid me from getting it. She was just like, it's not going to be as cool as you think it is. And to be fair, she was right. I am still to this very day consistently disappointed that magic is not as cool as I want it to be.
Right, that it's not coming out of our fingertips in like sparkles.
Like I'm consistently, I like want it to be even more, but it is pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing, but I get what you're saying because I want it to look the way it looks in Disney movies and in Harry Potter, and I want it to look that way.
It's not that. You know what I'm angry about? I'm angry that like a lot of people who say they want to do witch stuff don't want to do witch stuff. They don't want to talk about doing witch stuff. And I find that like the dearth of actual magicians in the world is what I am disappointed by.
I'm disappointed that I can't sing out the window and that the birds don't come in and clean my house. That
also seems like it would be good.
Right. As magic goes, that's what I thought magic looked like when I was a kid. Isn't that what's going to happen? I'm going to grow up. I'm going to be a beautiful princess, and or I'm going to be the wicked queen. I'm going to be able to take stuff from people. And it's just going to, it's going to be awesome. That's not really what it looks like. Magic is so much more about like doing deep inner work and getting your head on straight and figuring out who you really are so you could do what you really want in the world. At least that's what my magic looks like. It's hard work and you have to think about shit and you have to dig in and you have to, be really intentional.
But I feel like it's hard work the same way like math was hard work. Like it's hard work, but also it does work when you do it. Like it works. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like, I don't know that I could make a bird clean my house.
No.
But I can definitely speak the language of the bird to the spirits and get my house cleaned.
See, right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's quite practical. But again, I really feel like it is lame that it's not like it is in movies until I think about it. But you know what?
Yes.
I don't want to live in a world where magic is that easy because
then everybody would do it.
Yeah. I'm like seeing a lot of the way people run their lives and I don't think they should have power.
Not like that anyway.
I mean, I guess I just see a lot of idiots with power.
That's a whole nother episode. It's a whole nother conversation.
They're not doing right with it.
So go back to, you bought this book.
Okay.
What book was it?
Okay, I bought 2 books actually. And my mom was right. They were both disappointing, but they were disappointing in different ways.
Okay.
And there was stuff I got out of them. So the first book was, I feel bad. I don't know what this book is called. I call it Buckland's Big Blue Book of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. I think it's called like Complete Introduction to Witchcraft or something. But I feel like you're laughing. You know exactly what book I mean. Everybody our age knows what book I
know
mean.
exactly what book you're talking about.
It's by Ray Buckland. It's 8.5 by 11 and cobalt blue. And it's, you know what? Like for books that I could have bought in, like it was better than most books on the market at that time.
Sure, absolutely.
Like no shade on Ray Buckland. But I will also, so like, I'm just saying that's what that book is.
Yes.
And I'm laughing because everybody knows what book I mean when I say 100%. That, except for young kids who have no idea what
and they're like, his Raymond Buckland. And you're like, get off of TikTok. Okay.
Or not. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I would not recommend that book to people today. Like it's not, no shade on Ray Buckland, but it's not that great of a book. But
and
you know
it's
what
also
I mean?
about
Like,
who you
one
are.
of the
Like some
children
people,
giant.
find something like that and they're like,
Right.
oh my God, this speaks
And-
to me. This makes sense to me. And other people are like, this reads
and
like stereo instructions.
To be clear, me too. Like, I don't
Right.
regret having read that book. There was a lot
Mhm.
of good stuff in that book.
Right.
Here's what I feel like the most important things I learned from that book are: magic is real,
Mhm.
but it's work. You have to like do some things to make it work.
Yeah.
And that like it is written, like if you read carefully, magic is like woven between the pages of like mythology and folklore and religion and like and nature. And if you really just look for it, you can find it. That's really, I feel like that's the good things I got out of that book.
And you were
and then
8
I also got
when you read that book.
yeah, I guess I was probably more like 11.
Even still.
I mean, I was a precocious, weird, like I was a weird, like if you just imagine in your head the kind of weird, spooky little girl who grows up to be a professional witch nun, you're right. Like I was a weird, spooky little girl who.
Okay, you're talking about like everyone I know, so I can't.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like
I can't pinpoint like.
Yeah, I guess
like
what I'm
all
saying
my
is
closest
like,
friends.
Yes, I read a lot of. I was a strong reader at 8 or 9.
Okay.
So yeah, okay. I mean, I got other things out of that book as well.
And the other book?
The other book I got was called An Encyclopedia of White Magic by Patty Slade, which is a less famous book. People don't always recognize that one. It's quite good. So, okay, so for people who don't know Ray Buckland, that's a very like directly inherited from the Golden Dawn kind of high Wicca wannabe ceremonial magician.
Right.
I don't mean wannabe in a bad way. I mean like
if you want to be
if you want to be a ceremonial magician, like that's a place to start.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it's also like written by a guy. There's like a weird. I'm not saying Ray Buckland is sexist compared to other 100-year-old white dudes.
You also have to remember when it was written.
It's an
and
old
who
book,
it was written by.
And it's a book about Wicca,
yes.
Which means that like that whole male versus female polar archetype, it's going to come up in that book, and he's going to handle it. I
From
guess
his
gracefully for no white guy, he's gonna hand in 1980 or whenever he wrote that book. He's gonna handle it gracefully, but that book maybe doesn't stand up well to rereading.
Right, you might be able to pull things out of it.
But again, there's lots of good stuff in that book, and Ray Buckland is no shade. Like I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying. I'm not recommending you get
as an 11-year-old girl.
It was amazing. That book changed my life. It was so good.
Right, but you're not recommending it to 11-year-old girls today.
Yeah, exactly.
Fine. There are other books we would recommend.
Patty Slade, on the other hand, was Patty Slade is less well known as a person. So I actually don't know anything about Patty Slade except what's in this book.
Okay.
But that I read when I was like 9. My impression from the book was that she was part of like an inheriting coven, right, where like many people, like their parents or even their grandparents, had also been in this coven, and it was like a mixed Gardnerian, Alexandrian, and like a more mixed and relaxed, and it was a coven that was based like on a farm in England. And this was like aesthetically, that book was like much more what I wanted. This was like, it smelled like a fairy tale.
Right.
Ray Buckland's book was maybe more useful in terms of like straight up magical technique type stuff.
Utilitarian, right? Like,
but it was not an inspiring book. Like it didn't.
You needed to have something with imagination and personality and mysticism.
And on the other hand, Patty Slade's book was a little thin on actual, like if I tried to tell you any actual techniques I learned in that book that I still do, I couldn't. But I can definitely like describe the beautiful pictures of the Holly King.
Right.
And like, you know what I mean? And so somehow the two of them together, because then I heard what Buckland was saying. Like what I learned, the central thing I learned was like, it's there if you look for it.
Right.
And then Patty Slade showed me this way of looking. Do you know what I mean? Like
I know
she had done that. She had done that. Like she could see she could show me the magic in like an oak tree. And so she didn't really have any, at least I do not recall learning any kind of like coherent theory from that book at all.
Right. Right.
But the two of them together was like enough.
And that
because I felt validated. Like I already knew this was true.
Right.
I didn't know that anybody else knew that.
Right. So
I already knew you could talk to a tree because I'd been talking to trees.
Right.
This whole
And now you're
fucking
like, oh
time.
my goodness, I'm totally validated because there's actually
Like,
books on how to talk to trees.
I'm like not just a baby, which I was still young enough at that point that I wasn't concerned I was crazy.
Right.
I was concerned that like this was baby imagined play that I just wasn't growing out.
Right. That maybe it
And
wasn't
later,
real and that it was all in
by
your
the
head.
time I'm getting to, well, sort of.
Right.
But in the way that like kids know that their imaginary friends were
imaginary,
but that's not the same as being fake. Like there's
100%.
There's like a childlike state of wonder that I had watched people grow out of.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I did not understand staying in that state to mean I was like mentally ill. I did understand it to mean that I was like developmentally a baby. Like I should have grown out of playing this game by now, but I hadn't.
So now you've been eye open to the fact that
right now I'm like, oh, I'm not a baby, I'm a witch.
I'm a witch.
That was cooler
as a little kid, and so
relatively young. Yeah.
So did you start like talking to your parents about that? Did you start introducing these kind of practices and principles into your family life? I imagine that would have been really difficult to introduce to your parents are like, she's a kid, let's just let her do her thing. Like, what was that like?
Sort of. Okay. Again, my parents were definitely clear that like they were not in the market for a religion.
We're good. Yeah.
Like, which was not because they already had a religion. It's because I was brought up in a like pretty hardline atheist house. Like really? my dad was like pretty hardline atheist, and as a kid, and he kind of mellowed out of it as he got older, which was definitely a reaction to his. Yeah. Like he had grown up Christian in a way that was very uncomfortable for him.
Absolutely.
And so like he reacted against that. And my mom's family was like not religious.
Right. The Jewish culture, but not religious.
But like
Jewish.
They didn't go to synagogue when they were kids either. And like, and that's pretty normal. So I grew up with something. I think one of the things that really helped me find the witchcraft in, I don't know how to say this because Wicca as a religion, like as an initiatory tradition, like, no, that's not actually what I'm talking about. Like I wasn't getting that because I was getting it out of a book at Barnes and Noble.
Understood.
Right. But like whatever that kind of late 80s, early 90s packaged pop witchcraft was deeply unsatisfying. And it was packaged as a religion. But Buckland had told me, I say Buckland taught me, but I knew this all along. He validated for me that if you read between the lines in religion, like there was some value there. Right. Which is not what I grew up believing. I grew up being told. Like I definitely grew up with the idea that like religion is the opiate of the masses. It just fucks people up and makes them do terrible things. Like it's not it's
not untrue though. I mean,
it's not that it's false. Which, like even it might even be true. Like, is there a spiritual, like my dad, nobody was a hardline atheist in the way they were like, absolutely, like Richard Dawkins, there's no such thing as God. Absolutely not. But they were definitely of the opinion that like people who had God in their life were worse. Like they acted worse. They had poor ethics. And that was my parents' experience of it. And I will say, I believe that to be the experience of basically all non-Christians in the United States. That like there is just an observation that like the louder somebody is about their Christianity, the more of a hateful, bigoted I would think they are. Especially
from what we've learned in recent years.
And
I think that's the minute somebody
that's a pretty universe. Like if you grow up, at least I grew up in Bible country as a Jewish atheist. So like I've definitely had rocks thrown at me while being told I was going to hell.
Absolutely.
That's just like a part of my experience.
Or just so like so many of us have to hide, like, I mean, it wasn't until I decided to quit my regular job that I could be like out of the quote unquote room closet.
I'm just saying like I grew up Jewish, so I did not have that option to hide. Like I was getting rocks thrown at me as a 4-year-old.
Right. Just because your family was Jewish.
Not Christian. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
It's just what it is. I mean,
exactly.
Like, it's not,
I mean, that's very, very, very awful and completely unacceptable. But I would say that what we've learned in the last couple of years is the louder somebody's screaming, I'm this religion.
They're not usually good people.
Right.
Which is like a complicated sentence from somebody wearing a nun habit. I appreciate the irony there, but guys. I get it.
The deal is, it's the difference between you're going to do this because this is what feels right for you
Yeah.
versus you're going to do this because it's what feels right for me.
Yeah, exactly. And
Right?
so I grew up with that pressure from the outside world,
Absolutely.
but not from my parents. So my
Right.
parents thought like your new religion. Also, it should be noted that in this same time period, right? So like 8 through 14, where like all of this is happening, I also like tried to become Catholic for a little while, and my parents called my bluff.
So you're just like searching for something spiritual
I mean,
that
I had this experience of the spirit world that was like
right.
not deniable. Like,
Right.
like, you know, people ask this question, like, how can you be like sciencey? Like, I couldn't, like Occam's razor, the simplest explanation of my actual experience of the world was that like some weird shit was going on that other people didn't know about. Like the
Right.
occult, that it was occulted. It was hidden from view in some way. And I definitely like understood from folklore that some people could hear ghosts and some people couldn't. Like it, you know what I mean? It wasn't, I knew that many people thought I was crazy, but I also knew that most people I knew thought I was going to hell. So like I maybe
So what the
wasn't
fuck
that
difference does it make?
invested. Like I guess I thought most people were wrong about a lot of
Right.
stuff.
Well, the difference is,
So it
Sarah,
wasn't that
you
hard
had
to like fight against that idea.
you had the safety net within your family. You know,
Yeah,
you had
exactly.
your parents going, we love you, we accept you.
Right.
We don't get it, but
No
we love you and
question.
we accept you. So
Yeah,
the outside
absolutely.
world didn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Like it was
Look,
scary
there
and
is
there was
no-
bullying and all that stuff, but it didn't make a difference.
No,
you were able to flourish as a witch.
Absolutely.
So at what point
Yeah.
did you go from like, I'm like, so obviously, so you were practicing, you would say you were a practicing witch from your early teens, obviously through your entire
witchcraft the whole time.
Right.
Yeah, like
Through
I didn't
your-
stop.
through your career as a teacher, all of those things, right? At
Right.
that time, were you also, tell us a little bit, because we've gone in so many different directions,
Yeah,
and I want to
sorry,
make sure
I'm
that
rambling
I love
today.
it. It's not. It's great. Everybody loves to learn about people's journeys, but I
Best
was really,
first date on the radio.
I know, right? I want to know too, like, at what point did you start leaning into the Greek side of things? Because that seems to be very prominent in your practice and in your teaching. So I really, let's tell people how you got there.
Part of it
why,
is, why. My dad was really proud of being Greek. Like if you've ever seen that movie, like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where like the dad thinks that Greeks invented everything. That's 100% my dad. Like,
right?
Yeah, I mean, we did. It's just obvious. Like, sorry to all you people whose ancestors were living in caves, but the rest of us like invented civilization. Right. Which, to be fair, was maybe a bad idea. I'm gonna own that right now. But at the time, I did not know that. Right? I was brought up in this world where like, a lot of my friends didn't have an intact cultural transmission. Like, I didn't think of it that way, but it was clear to me that like generic white people didn't know their ancestors or their culture. Like they didn't have this thing that I had. And I had 2 of them. Right. I had a Greek one and a Jewish one that were different. And so that made it easy for me to like reflect on the nature of that as a thing. Like being bicultural gives you this way to think about not just your culture, but culture in general.
Absolutely.
I guess is what I'll say. Right.
Yep.
And also I had these 2 that were relatively similar, but very different in some ways, right? Particularly about like the roles of women. Quite different.
Yes.
Right. And so like we had a lot of Greek mythology and stuff in our house that I was super into. Like that was a thing my dad and I could bond over. Like I was into Greek myths. So the part of me being witchy that like, it's not that he like shit all over everything, but I mean, you can tell when you're talking to your parent, like I wasn't, I'm still a savvy human being. Like I could tell that he wasn't actually interested in any of these things I was saying. He thought they were silly nonsense, but he was listening because he was a good dad, right? So
you were leaning into that Greek
leaned
mythology.
Into that partly that, but also, once I started to like meet other witches, which was always like immediately my goal. And I feel lucky that like I did meet some witches. So the person I mentioned who's now a professor of botanical medicine, well, I met them when we were in the Girl Scouts when we were like 9. It's awesome. Right. So like I had other like weird people to be witchy with. Right. But I didn't have like maybe older, like grown up teachers, but that was the thing I wanted. Like I'd seen wizard movies. Like I was on the lookout for a Merlin.
For a mentor, you're looking for a mentor.
Like I wanted a teacher. And the people I met in that quest were relatively disappointing, truthfully, in a lot of ways.
I think everybody's had that experience at least once, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think you and I are about the same age. I don't know how long you've been in this witch scene. You know, the early 90s witch scene was like not a great place for a young lady to be. Like there was like some unsavory business going on that having a good, stable family, I saw and was like, nope.
No, I've been
like practicing. It was very obvious to me.
I found my path. I was very, very, like I said, grew up in a really, really traditional Italian Catholic family. I was like super involved in my church, and I wanted so hard to belong there.
You know, I wanted that a lot too. Like from the outside, church looked amazing.
Yeah. And I like sang in the choir, and I taught kids, and like I was dating a boy I met at church when I was like 16 years old or 18 years old, however old I was. And I was like, oh, I love, this is so great. And I had like plays, but it always felt forced. And I always kind of had problems with the way women were portrayed. And I was always like, it doesn't really make any sense to me, but they let me do these things. So I'm good here. And I want to be with this community. For me, it was that searching for community and searching for identity as a spiritual woman. And it wasn't until I was in college that I took, and I've told this story a couple of times. I took a class called Women in Religion. It was supposed to be like an easy elective. And I took this class, and it blew my mind so much that I was very uncomfortable, and I dropped the class, but I kept the textbook. And the textbook that she wanted us to read was called, Wise Women, Midwives and Nurses. And it was like a brief history of how women went from being midwives to being called witches to being, wise women. And I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And that's when I started like finding witchcraft books and like, and for me, that was like 97, 98. And I started like going to local shops and finding these little books and stuff like that. And then just being very solitary until probably my mid-20s when I found community. But yeah, I mean, we didn't have like what you have now, where you could just go on the internet and be like, witchcraft, blah, 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 like, no, it was
but you know what? It's still like, is it better? I don't know.
Six and one half a dozen of another. You have to do more work.
There's still a lot of terrible things. It's a different kind of work. You still got to wade through a lot of crap.
100%.
It's just like, we were wading through a lot of nothingness.
100%. Right.
I don't know if it's better. Oh yeah.
Before we continue, we really, really need to take a break because we're almost done, but we haven't taken a break yet. So we're going to take a break and hear from our amazing sponsors. And then we're going to be right back with the incredibly sunshiny Sarah Mastros. We'll be right back. We are back with the amazing Sarah Mastros on Conversational Witchcraft. And right before the break, we were talking about our journeys as young little witchlets in the 90s, and looking for books and trying to, educate ourselves. And it's kind of weird that like we were looking for these books and now we write these books. And I often feel like
that's why I write them.
I feel like I have a responsibility that like I got just like as an aside, I got approached to write a book and I was like, oh, I really don't have the time. I don't really, and then they were like, all right, well, we'll just find somebody else. And I was like, oh, no, I have to write it. I have to write it now because I can't trust it to somebody else. Like somebody, just some rando writing a book on kitchen witchery. Like I'm going to have to write this book because I don't trust anybody else to put out the basics, because what if there's some 17-year-old kid out there going, oh, I want to be a kitchen witch. And they find I don't want to say the wrong information, but like, I want it to be comprehensive and I want it to be accepting and inclusive and all those things that I was looking for when I was that age. So I feel like I have a responsibility now, right? Like, don't you?
I totally agree. Absolutely. And also like, it's still the case. Like the book I'm writing right now on Salamander of Pentacles, I feel like I'm writing it because I'm pissed off that nobody has written it yet. Like, and I feel like there's this reference book that I've been looking for
Right.
for a long time.
And you're like,
But
fuck it, I'm just
instead,
gonna do it myself.
Spent the last 15 years figuring all this shit out.
Right.
And I wish I hadn't have had to do that. Like, why didn't somebody already put this in a book so I didn't have to do all that work?
Because
and
it was
nobody
meant,
has, so
it was meant
now
for
I'm gonna
you.
put it in a book. Yeah, right.
It was meant for you. So speaking of books, I happen to be
Yeah.
holding right here your big book of magical incense.
Me too.
Oh my God. So, okay, let's just be like super honest right now.
Mhm.
I use incense the way most witches use incense. You know,
Mhm.
I don't get too much into, I mean, I make some of my own sometimes for my own dried herbs, for my own, you know, kitchen witchy purposes, but not in terms of like offering to the ancestors this specific thing, or, oh my God, you have this one thing in here. I actually had to earmark the page because it was really cool. Where is it? Where is it? No, it's not that. It was something really cool. It was like, not money magic. It was, like a super awesome, like really in-depth cleansing with incense.
Mhm.
And I was like, I like, aside from, you know, doing a little bit of, you know, this with a little cedar or a little sage or a little rosemary, I never really thought about doing this kind of a deep work before, or
Right.
using incense, like you said, like an offering to the ancestors or things like that. So talk to us about, we know all about your journey now and how you got to be this
Yeah,
professional
sorry.
witch, but like, why a big book of incense? Like,
So
what brought you here?
Well, okay. So remember I mentioned I had a friend who is now a professor of botanical medicine.
Yes.
They were always super into plants. So
Right.
even though plants were not necessarily like she was into plants the way I was into like witchcraft, like witchcraft qua witchcraft. Like she was into herbalism qua
Right.
herbalism, right?
Right.
And then like that was the center for her, and witchcraft was like part of that. Just like I was into witchcraft and herbalism was part of that. But that means
Yes.
that like where somebody who didn't have like a direct calling to the plant path, I came up learning witchcraft with somebody who did. So my witchcraft was always really deeply rooted in plants. Like I knew a lot about herbalism because
Right.
I happened to live with an herbalist for like, we were BFFs as kids, but then we became roommates like in college and
Right.
like thereafter. So like she was just like, I was there when she was learning plant chemistry. Right. And so when I first became a professional witch, making and selling incense blends was one of the things I did. Right. And as you can imagine, selling incense over the internet is actually a little tricky because like it doesn't, I don't have a smell-o-vision and it doesn't really look like anything. It's just like a pile of herbs, like
leaves.
It's hard to
this is a bunch of dried leaves.
Yeah, it's just a bowl full of leaves. It's kind of hard to take like an exciting photo of.
Right.
So I ended up writing like descriptions of it.
Yes.
Right. Which were basically recipes. Right. Like I didn't know how to describe it without giving a recipe. So like I realized that I had to make it seem cool. Like, so honestly, this book's in some way like started off as advertising copy for incense. Like I was just describing what was in the incense. And then I would like, here's what I use it for.
Right.
And then, but then, you know, I wanted to write, so this is my second book. I wanted to write a book that was really appealing to like, that didn't have a lot of prerequisites, right? So my first book, Orphic Hymns Grimoire, it's not that it has prerequisites, it's that it's like kind of a niche book. Like you were saying, like not everybody's super into like ancient Greek stuff.
Right.
If you are, that's a great book. People who are ancient Greek nerds love that book. But I, you know, I wanted to write a book that also appealed to other people. Like I just wanted to do something different.
Right.
Right. And so I thought about like what I was doing. And, you know, I liked writing those incense recipes. So I thought like, okay, I'm going to write an incense recipe book. And I talked to Weiser, I did that. And then I started thinking, okay, here's a dirty secret for people who aren't in publishing. You don't sell a book. You sell an idea for a book. I haven't, like, when I sell a book to a publisher, I haven't written that book yet. I've written like an outline. Right. I have an idea for a book and I've written like a chapter of it.
And they get to decide whether or not it's going to make any money. And
and they decide based on that. And and
they go,
and,
this
you know,
is a good idea.
And they're like, oh, this is a good idea. Cool.
Book.
Write this, which is fine. And then they're like, write this book, right? And then I started thinking about like,
shit, I have to write a book.
It wasn't that. I wanted to write a good book. So I started thinking about like one of the things they make you do in order to sell a book, you don't have to write a book, but you have to write a list of books which are similar to the book you're going to write and explain how they're different, which hand to God is harder than writing a book.
I'm going to have to agree
writing
with that.
Those comparisons. And then like the proposal you have to write is I hate it so
right.
much.
It's like, who
but
is
that's
this
what you
book
do.
for? And how many words
Yeah,
is it going to be? And how many other books like this are there out there? And you're like,
Yeah.
oh
And
my
I always
God,
want to
I
be,
don't
there
know.
are no other books like this. If there was another book like this, I wouldn't be writing it.
And
I always want to
plays-
say that, but that's
right.
not what they want to hear.
And that plays
Like,
to, that's an advantage and a disadvantage, because when you're like, there's nothing else like there, they're like, well, then how do we know it's going to sell? And you're like, but there's nothing else like that. And they're like,
Right.
well,
So-
yeah, exactly.
So I started thinking about what books there were, right? Especially for a book like Magical Incense. Like it's a pretty obvious like when they ask what other books are like this, well, it's other books about incense. That's
Right.
what they're asking.
Exactly.
Right? So I started thinking about them, and they were all good in some ways and bad in other ways. And so I started thinking about like what was wrong with them. Like, and for me, what I had found frustrating is they would have this recipe, but there was no like explanation of how these ingredients turned into this recipe. Like there was no explanation of like why this recipe for wealth drawing incense had clover in it. Like, how did they do? Like, they didn't explain that. And so that's what I had always wanted out of these books. So I started writing that. And then I thought about like, you know, because if what I was writing was just like a universal, like like an index of incense ingredients, like the internet can do that so much better than a book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm not going to write that book because like nobody wants that as a book. Like,
right.
That's a thing you want to be keywords. So I thought instead about like, what do you want from a book? And you want some sort of like narrative and some sort of depth. Right. That's what I want in a book. So I thought about that, and I thought about it. And so that led me to this place where like the core skill I want people to get out, it's because I'm a teacher, right? So I always think about a book in some sense, like a lesson plan. Like,
right. Absolutely.
What do I want people to learn from this book?
Yeah.
And what I want them to learn is like the ability to make up their own recipes.
And right? I have to say that I agree with that 100%.
That's what I want.
I think that's exactly what you did. You know, my books are all recipe driven, right? Because I'm a kitchen witch. So everything is recipe
and I
driven.
thought a lot about, I don't read a lot of cookbooks, but I talked to a lot of people who do read cookbooks.
Right.
Because after it became pretty clear that what I was writing was a cookbook, which I hadn't maybe realized
and
for a little while.
It's recipes, but there's not necessarily cooking, but it's but it's like,
it's similar. I also talked to people who read a lot of cookbooks and asked them like, what did they like and what did they didn't like in them? And so I tried to, I don't know, I thought a lot about like what makes a cookbook a good cookbook. And I did this book.
I think you really nailed it. Like
plan.
I really like that in the beginning of the book, you have like this sort of, I don't want to say outline, but like you have this like a glossary of like, here are all the ingredients. So it would be like, you're going through like, you know, okay, what's rosemary good for in terms of incense? Why would you burn rosemary? What's bay leaf for? Why would you burn bay leaf? That sort of thing. And you have that all in the front of the book. So if somebody's like, oh, I happen to have rosemary, let me do this. And then as you go through the book, it does feel like the first half of the book is really foundational and like, here are these ingredients and why would you use them? And then the second half of the book is like, here's a bunch of ideas and let's inspire you. You can use my recipe for this incense and my ritual for, you know, this incense or this spell, but you don't have to. And I think the way you put it together, I think the way you put it together makes it like you said, it's like a lesson plan, but like with your favorite teacher and you want to learn from them. You're not like,
well, thank you.
Oh God, this again. You know what I mean? You're like, wow, really engaged.
I tried to do that when I was in classroom too.
But
and it's
you
actually, it's much easier to do it with magical incense than it was to do it with calculus. I mean, like
the
people reading this book do actually want to learn.
They do actually want to learn it. Well, like the
it's
offering,
inherently interesting.
The offering to the beloved dead, like I said before, like I never would have thought about using incense. I would have used incense in a ritual performing for the beloved dead, but I would not have necessarily made that my focus. And I feel like this is not in any way a negative. I feel like this type of work is very similar in terms of its ease and accessibility to like candle magic. It's super easy.
Agreed.
It's super easy to get your hands on these ingredients. It's super simple.
We were talking about
together.
Ray Buckland earlier. Another book I thought of when I was like writing this book was Buckland's book on candle magic, which I think is just called like Buckland's Guide to Candle Magic or something. And it's structured actually quite similarly.
Yeah. It reminds me.
That's one of the books I thought of.
Yeah.
I agree. I think incense work is very much like candle work in the sense that you can use it for anything. But I also want to say that like some of the things in this book, there are spells in this book that if I was just like doing them naturally, when I did them naturally,
right.
maybe incense was not as big a part of them. And I maybe puffed up the incense part a little bit because I wanted to show a lot of different things you could do with incense. So all the like spells are really incense heavy because it's an incense book, but also I wanted the spells independent of the, like I also wanted to teach people spells like, and about incense. And then there's this other piece where I just want to teach people magic.
You really do. And again, like this, getting to know you, you can really see how your personality comes through and your teaching style of being so open and so accessible. It really does come through, and it makes the learning simpler, and you're very welcome. And thank you, because it's very well done. And, again, very accessible. And for me, in all the witchcraft that I do, and primarily what I do is kitchen magic and kitchen witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And I would consider incense making to be kitchen witchcraft.
Same.
Right.
And I will also say, like, everything I talk about in this incense book, like, it really expands cleanly into any kind of like the whole big giant category of like potion magic, or even just material magic. So like what's rosemary good for in an incense is the same things that rosemary is good for, like in a kitchen, like an eating recipe or a tonic. And also, like, just the way you think about, I want to teach you not just what rosemary is good for, but like what properties of the plant rosemary tell me that it will be good for that. So I know it's going to be good for some things because of its chemical constituents. And I know it's going to be good for some things because it's shaped like little needles. And so I wanted to highlight that in the course of the book, so that not just you could look things up in the book, but you can open up your spice cabinet and be like, oh, well, here I have, I'm trying to think of some, I don't know what's in my cabinet that's not in the book, but like, I'm sure there must be daisies, like daisy flowers. Right. They are not in the book, but I can think about like the properties of daisies, right? And that will tell me how to turn them into magic. Exactly. And I think that skill transfers out to like all kinds of magic that are of sympathetic magic where you're like combining materials to do things.
Right. And you're also, I feel the same way about magic in terms of like, I want to inspire people to do their own thing, because spiritual practice and magical practice is so fucking individual, right? It is so much this is your practice, me, this is my practice, this is their practice. Right. But I want people to go, oh, I want to do a money spell, and green leafy greens are money magic, cash, quick cash, money magic, right? Oh, well, this book said spinach, but spinach is a leafy green and I only have kale. Does that work? Yes, it works because it's a leafy green. Like, to get people to actually change the way they think about ingredients and the way they think. And I think you've done a really good job with that, Sarah. I'm really for real.
Oh, thank you. No, I agree. And I want to do that, but I also want to get them to actually think about it. Because here's a pet peeve of mine. You can go too far the other way. Like, it's not, here's a fact about like weird, as a person who also does like some like complicated, resurrected from ancient tablets I had to translate from a foreign language magic, like, the ingredients, you don't start with a list of weird ingredients and then have to track them out. Like, here's an example. I use an ingredient that I use in my magic a lot is volcanic ash.
Okay.
The reason for that is, one time at a yard sale, somebody was selling like 100 little tourist canisters of ash from Mount St. Helens. I have an entire box of it that I've just been slowly using. That's what it is. It's like, I just had a weird, or like beech nuts gathered from a Neolithic burial mound by a one-armed engineer. That's another thing I have a lot. That's because my sister-in-law, who only has one full arm and is an engineer, happens to live really near to a Neolithic burial mound that is dedicated to a smith god. Like, it's just a thing I had. I saw it in the world and I was like, you know how a toddler just picks up random cool things? That's what I mean when I say I never grew out of toddler magic. I saw that and I was like, that's cool. I'm going to take that. And then I had it and I came up with something to do it. Like, it goes that direction.
You intuit this could be magical. You know, I mean, I pick up, I think
everything's magic if you try hard.
Everything's magic if you look hard enough, right? And if you believe in it, or if it speaks to you. I mean, I have bits and bobs that I've picked up, and shiny bits that I've picked up, you know, because witches were all just crows collecting shiny shit.
Right. And
you
so
know,
I want to, you know, there's that, but then there's the other end where like you can swing too far the other direction, right? Yeah. Like you don't need the exact perfect nut from the exact right tree.
No.
And also, I see some people on the internet who is like, rosemary can be substituted for any other herb. And I'm like, no,
not
what?
Really. Not
like,
really,
that's just as dumb in magic as it would be in a recipe. Like you can't just, cook, but whatever herb you feel like,
it's going to taste differently. And it's not just going to taste differently, but the energy of it's going to be different. And especially if you're being mindful about those ingredients and you're specifically saying, I want to use rosemary because I need peace, or I want to use, I want to do, right. What's the difference between lemons and limes? They're both citrus. You can interchange them. You can't. They have a different flavor. Right. They might both be for purification energetically, but
they're different.
But they're different, and they're going to be different, you know?
Exactly. So, and so that's that like magical liminal zone between like getting all in your head. Like magic is a creative and intuitive endeavor, but it is also about specialized technical knowledge.
Yes.
Like you actually have to know things.
You do. And
you have to be able to do both of those things. And I feel like that's sort of the zone, and you can go too far, right? We all know people who are like, so like all up in the details that they never actually do anything. And then we know other people who are like so sloppy and lazy that they never actually do anything.
Right.
And I feel like it's always about finding this. Me, by the way, I definitely am too lazy and too in my head, like simultaneously. Like, but I fall into both of those traps. Every once in a while, I hit this magic zone in the middle.
Right.
Right. And I feel like that's where the good is. So I'm always trying to like turn people back into that liminal zone of learning.
But that was the very beginning. The very first thing that we started talking about in this conversation was finding that middle ground, because it is where the fun and the joy come through. And when we are in that space, we are more open to learning. We're more open and responsive to taking in new information, whether it's, technical or intuitive or whatever it is. And I think you nailed that. And we've talked about so many things, and we've learned so much about your journey, but it's the thing that comes through the most when talking to you, when reading your book, is how much you care about the other person learning, and what your what your whole journey has been is that journey of, I've learned all these things, I've done all these things, and I want to share that knowledge and take what with it you want. And that comes through in your writing. Just your whole vibe is just like share. And
I am definitely in service to the God of the teacher of teachers.
And it's
whatever
fantastic.
name we want to call that God, that's mine. And secretly,
and
a lot of people call that the devil. Like the light bringer. That's
the knowledge, the needing, exactly.
The Prometheus who stole fire for you. Those are my gods. And I would like to teach you how to make a fire.
That's so fucking fantastic. And I'm so sorry to say this, but we're like almost out of time. And I'm it flew by, as am I. It flew by. But before we wrap up, I have a question that I ask every guest that comes on this show. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything that we talked about. It's just my signature question. I am a kitchen witch. And so if I was to create a magical meal for you, if you could have me cook for you one meal, one dish, what would it be and why?
Oh gosh, that's complicated. I love to cook, by the way. Like,
of course you do. You're Greek and Jewish.
Right. I'm not an especially like accomplished cook. Like my food's not always pretty, which
Doesn't
is what I
be.
seek. Yeah, I make a good, like I make like a pasticcio or whatever. But I will also say, like, here's a fact about my life. No one ever, like, it's so unusual for me to cook something that I didn't cook. It's so, so what I would want you to cook for me.
Yes.
I'm going to sorry, just
give it to me.
It's going to sound like I'm punking out, but I would want to eat something that like, I didn't even know what it was. Like, I want you to cook something that is like, I would want to eat whatever you would show off.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like whatever the weirdest, coolest, the thing that like you can't serve normal people because it's too weird for them. So like cricket souffle. I mean, I don't know, like something amazing and cool and like, but the most like, I don't know what you cook.
I cook everything, but I struggle with, believe it or not, something I'm trying to teach myself more of is like Asian flavors, because I love Asian flavors. I love Asian food, and I suck at making it. Like, I don't know if I just don't have the right.
Actually, I grew up Greek and Jewish. I can cook things like that.
Right. I mean, obviously my specialty is Italian food, right?
I mean, I also, I would never turn that down.
I make mean Mexican food as well. Because my husband and I fucking love Mexican food. So we eat Mexican food like 3 or 4 times a week. So it's either like pasta or tacos. But like, I don't cook weird. I cook like next level. Like
all right. Yeah.
For example, we have a friend, my husband invited a friend from work over, and we've planned a nachos extravaganza.
Okay.
So eleganza extravaganza, nachos like eleganza extravaganza. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to have like 3 different kinds, at least 3 different kinds of nachos. So I'm going to do like traditional beef nachos with, traditional toppings on yellow corn chips and blah, blah. And then we're going to do like shredded chicken with like a green chimichurri and like, shredded spinach and like a white sauce. And then we're going to do like a roasted vegetable. Like, so it's not weird. It's just like, I try to take things that would be
amazing,
normal, and make them like extra.
Yeah.
So like, what's like your favorite food or something you haven't had since you were a kid, or like,
oh God,
or like now you can't stop thinking about nachos. Like I
do like nachos. I mean, I honestly love like baked pasta dishes in the realm of like lasagna or like mac and cheese, just like that whole category. That's definitely my favorite. And it always seems really like simple, but like, I feel like that's where somebody has to actually be a good cook. I mean, not really. Like if you put cheese on macaroni, it's going to be delicious, but like, no, there's a lot of like, it gives you a lot of leeway to do a lot of like exciting things.
Right. Excuse Ollivander. There he goes. Can you see him? Mm-hmm. He's very upset because he wants to eat his dinner, and he's like, "You're talking about food." No, listen. The thing about simple food is that it's harder because you can't hide behind all these different flavors.
Exactly.
It's got to be perfect. Yes. Your proportions have to be perfect. Your flavors have to be perfect. Your ingredients need to be really as good as they can possibly be. Says the girl who's about to open up a box of macaroni and cheese for dinner, and just letting you know that that's happening in my life when we're done. But like I could make you like, I have in my book, a 4 cheese baked macaroni, and it's made with like smoked Gouda. And then I throw in like steamed broccoli to give it a little crunch. Like, it's so simple. Like, I feel like and I also feel like I should make you something yellow. Like I should make something that is like saffron colored. Like, so maybe I should like make saffron mac and cheese with like chopped up sweet potatoes and butternut squash and like all these.
You tell me when to be there for dinner and I will be there.
Well, if you're ever up here in my neck of the woods, you come over and I will cook for you 100%. But we'll have to have a meatball battle, right? You'll make Greek meatballs and I'll make Italian meatballs. You use mint. I use basil. Do you put lamb? Do you use lamb in your meatballs?
I like lamb. I do. But the meatballs I grew up with were usually a mixture of beef and pork.
Yep.
But lamb was not super easy to, like, our grocery store didn't always have, like, lamb was preferable. We just didn't, like, lamb was not in our grocery store most of the time.
Yeah. I love Greek food. I love Greek food.
Yeah, same.
Oh,
I love Greek food. I love Italian food. I really love all
food.
Honestly, I mostly like food, but I do particularly like Mediterranean.
Particularly
like falafel. I would like to learn to make. I've tried making falafel.
So easy.
I can make things that are I can't get the texture right. So like I'm making a thing that is good, but it doesn't like hold together. It's either too crumbly or like a little,
it's too dry or it's too wet.
Yeah, right? I have yet to master the, like, that's I'm not very good at the like finicky part of.
That's all about your chickpeas. That's all about your chickpeas, how they're mashed and how much liquid.
That's probably true.
Right. Like if you have
I just
if you don't take
have
enough
a feel
liquid
for
out.
them yet.
That's really the challenge, is getting the texture right. But once you get the texture right, you just have to do it 100 times. That's all. Just do it 100 times. So you just have to eat falafel once a week for, the next year, and you'll be fine. Then you'll find, what you can do.
When you say it that way,
you know what you can do with falafel batter, with the falafel dough or batter, whatever you call it, mix, put it in a waffle iron, and you can make falafel waffle. And then they don't need to be balls that fall apart. Falafel waffle.
That I could I mean, that's sort of what I'm saying. Like I can make, good. I've basically been making like falafel patties.
Falafel waffle. Make your batter. Put it in the waffle iron. Put it in I swear to you, freaking fantastic falafel waffle.
Right,
and then you can top with a little tzatziki, little fresh dill. Oh, I'm so hungry. Okay, Sarah Mastros,
it's dinner time.
You are so fantastic. This has been just like you, a ball of sunshine, and just so enlightening. And it's been really fun to hear about your story and your journey and what brought you here and all of that. So tell everyone where they can find you online. I know you're a witch for hire. So where can we find you if we want to reach out to you? Where can we buy your book? All that jazz.
Okay. The easiest URL for me is www.witchlessons.com. And then you can get to other things from there. So even if you that'll take you to the courses, but that's just easy to remember, that name. So if you go there, and then you can also find books there, and you could book a consultation if you wanted, like a tarot reading or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think. My next public teaching is actually, on Sunday. It snuck up on me. Is the Hills and Rivers Festival in Central Pennsylvania. So if you're in that area, you probably already know about it. But Hills and Rivers Summerfest in Central Pennsylvania, real near State College, is on Sunday. This
episode is not going to air until the fall. So we're recording.
Then you don't know about
Don't go there. Don't go there. Because this
the first weekend in October, I'm going to be at the Northwest Tarot Symposium.
Fabulous.
And strangely, that same weekend, I am also teaching online at the Astromagia conference.
Oh, fun.
So I'm going to teach one conference from my hotel at another conference, which is a very 2022 exciting thing to be doing.
It's such a badass thing to do, to be teaching classes while you're teaching classes on the road. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So
that's awesome.
I'm not teaching at the Northwest Tarot Symposium. We didn't talk about this at all. I actually also own a tarot app company.
My goodness. So then we didn't talk about it at all.
Called The Fool's Dog. So if people want to look up the Fool's Dog tarot app.
That is fantastic. And you're all over Instagram, you're all over Facebook, social media.
I'm not really on Instagram at all. I'm on Facebook. I'm theoretically on Twitter, but real talk, guys. Tweet. I'm not very interesting on Twitter because I'm a confused old lady, and I don't feel like I fully understand how Twitter works. So I don't want to do anything to them. I'm still figuring Twitter out. I've only been tweeting. I actually hate social media. It's just part of my job. So my publisher kind of strong-armed me into Twittering. So now I'm trying to Twitter, but I'm not very good at it yet. So I'm probably really boring.
Yes. My media team is like, you have to get on TikTok. I'm like, what's a TikTok? I have to take a talk, and I can't. I just figured out Instagram. I don't have time.
I mean, you have your own podcast. I'm so bad at this, guys.
I need to have my own podcast because I talk too much. I talk too much, and I can't keep it in. And otherwise, because of the pandemic, I didn't have a way to make any friends. So I needed to do this. And honestly, the podcast has been I have met so many friends in doing this, and I'm very proud, and I'm very grateful to say that it's doing really well. And I get to meet wonderful people like you, and it just seems to be growing. So I'm so grateful to have this platform, and I'm so grateful to get to meet people like you and learn about you and read your fabulous fucking book. I mean, the Big Book of Magical Incense.
Oh, here. And if it's going to come out in the fall, the second edition of my first book, Orphic Hymns Grimoire, will be out in September.
Excellent.
From Hadean Press. So I think by the time you guys hear this, I think it'll be out.
Excellent. So check out Sarah online at
www.witchlessons.com.
Excellent.
But also, if you just put my name into Google, with quotation marks, it'll be me. Like it's not a
You
like
can't
Sarah
miss
Master
her.
is a pretty unusual name. So
Yes.
Google will tell you where I am.
You are
there's
fantastic.
It'll be me. There's not another Sarah Maestro.
And there shouldn't be, because you are fantastic and no one else should even try to be you.
I always think it's weird when my friends like say Jason Miller. Like there are a lot of Jason Millers in the world. He's not even like, I have a friend, a magician named Jason Miller, who writes magic books.
Yes.
And he's like not the most famous Jason Miller. There's also like a baseball player named Jason Miller. And there's also like a Trump operative named Jason Miller. And I've never met somebody with my same name. And I feel like it would be super weird if I did. But I also realized that many of my friends, like I have another friend named Brian Charles. He's like not the only Brian Charles. There are a lot of those, but like, my name's not like that. I'm the oldest.
There's another Dawn Hunt, and she's like a romance writer or something like that. Like she also writes books, but she's like tall and blonde. And I'm like, oh, that's not me. So I added. I actually saw that when I
Googled you. When I Googled you.
That's not her. Yeah. Like that is totally not me. So
like,
I added.
It's gonna be a weird interview.
It's gonna be very weird. No, so I added like now like all my public profiles are all like Dawn Aurora Hunt, or they're under the company, which is Cucina Aurora. So I'm like, okay, you'll find me. Anyway, Sarah Mastros, you're fantastic. Thank you so much for spending time with me. This was just wonderful. It was so great to get to know you. And until next time,
thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
And we'll have more fun.
Thank you so much for being here. Until next time, I wish you all very many blessings and just so much gratitude. Thank you so much for being here.